Welcome back to another sci-fi episode where we continue to examine how you think, feel, and behave with money. And we'll continue with Carolyn White. She's our guest here today from the Employee Assistance Program here at Redstone Arsenal. Carolyn, we left with giving folks some practice and experiment. And hopefully some folks did that. If you are one of those folks that gets a gold star for those things, this will just be a whole new layer for you. For those that didn't, please continue to listen. You do not have to turn it off just because you did not practice or experiment. We're going to give you some more education and some more tools so you can start being more aware of how your thinking is impacting how you're feeling and how you're behaving with money. So we're tackling cognitive distortions. The first one, and most people are familiar with this one, it's called all or nothing thinking. And another word that most clinicians use is dichotomous thinking, where it's either good or bad. You're rich or poor. You have money or you don't. And I got to tell you, Carolyn, I tuned in to a financial class that was hosted by a different entity, and they had a therapist providing the financial class. And listen, I'm a therapist by trade, and I like stuff like that. I thought, oh, great, this is wonderful. It's a new niche, and more people are getting into it. But the first words out of her mouth were this: money. You either have it or you don't.
Oof.
And I thought, no. Now we're setting people up for failure at the outset.
Absolutely, because my two favorite are always and never.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutistic thinking.
Always be in this situation. I will never get out of this situation.
Never a good place to be. Never. Always something you can do about that, right? So we're starting to view things in the extreme. And here's an example when it comes to finances. I can't be perfect with financial planning, so I won't even try it. And that's where a lot of people get stuck. Now, these are true cognitive distortions that need to be challenged. In the last episode or part, I stated that not all negative thoughts have to be challenged or reviewed, and not all negative thoughts are distorted. But this is a level of distorted thinking because you start to really think of either or terminology or situations or experiences. You might even hear yourself say, I already blew the budget. What's the point?
Absolutely.
I'm already $100,000 in debt. What's another 100?
And this is where I'm going to say, from the mental health perspective, why we explore these distortions is because this is where we start to get into some pretty serious depression.
Yes.
And even the potential for someone to start developing suicidal thinking because of the level of impact in our mental health that starts with distorted thinking.
Right. And so what the panacea or the cure-all is simply challenging the thought. What is the evidence to support it? And what is the evidence against it?
Right.
So I do this with my girls all the time, especially since my 15-year-old is 15 and she's a girl. And we'll get into one of the cognitive distortions that teens generally engage in over and over. It's quite cute, but it is sad to see it in action. But you always know there's hope beyond the teenage years. But one of the things that folks start to do is they start to apply a value system to money in the all or nothing thinking category. The famous misquoted scripture, money is the root of all evil. Not true.
Right.
It's misguided. It's misquoted. That is not the intent.
Right.
And we always talk about money being a tool.
Absolutely.
Money is a resource. Money has no morality attached to it.
Absolutely.
The individual handling the money is the morality behind the money. or the spending.
Right.
So we have to get away from that all or nothing thinking. And I'll talk about how to challenge that a little bit in the future. But here's another one, overgeneralization, where you choose one thing out of a situation, one negative that occurs that is incorporated into a self-defeating pattern over and over again. Here's what it sounds like. And this is really where you get into that absolutistic language. I missed another due date. I'll never get it right. I never do things right. I'll always be broke. I'll always live paycheck to paycheck. And so you talk about suicidal thinking. What happens with clients, and I will say it's quite sad that the suicide statistics and studies that are out there is a lot of evidence to suggest that the folks that have completed suicide have had significant financial distress.
Typically, finances are one of the top reasons. Finances, health, relationships.
That's right.
And if you look at those three things, they're not standalone things. They are all interconnected.
That's right. And the American Psychological Association consistently cites relationships and money as the top two stressors year after year.
Here in the Army, we see the same thing. So amongst our service members, the top three are going to be finances, relationship, and they usually jockey back and forth between 1 and 2. Legal is often number 3.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of stress, a lot of undue stress with legal issues, especially with divorcees and custody battles. Those are horrendous. I feel for those individuals. Then you can also find yourself in another cognitive distortion called a mental filter, where everything that is filtered through a situation occurs, it goes through this mental filter where you start discarding the positive in that filter and only focus on the negative. And one of the things that Dr. Paquette mentioned in this continuing education class, which, by the way, if you didn't listen to part 1, I took a continuing education class with Institute for Brain Potential where Dr. Jonah Paquette provided this talk. And he reminded me of a famous individual who said that we have this negativity bias where the human brain is like Velcro for negative thoughts.
Absolutely.
And like Teflon for positive thoughts. I had to explain to my girls what Teflon was. It's like olive oil, it's like it's not going to, those positive thoughts are going to slip right off of us because we don't generally look for positive things in our lives.
No, and it's an aspect of our survival mechanism.
It is.
We don't learn from the positive, we learn from the negative, unfortunately.
Yeah. And that's how we learn how to stay away from certain things. It is a survival mechanism. But what we need to understand is this mental filter is a distortion that can be challenged. And here's what it might sound like. The mortgage lender asked a lot of uncomfortable questions. She must think I'm a fraud. She must think I don't deserve this house. She must think that I didn't work hard enough for this house. But you got the house.
Right.
So that's the thing. And I've actually had someone come in and really belabor the discomfort in the closing of the home. And it's like 3 hours of total discomfort of signing documents and doing different things. And she kept not looking for, but searching for and recalling from that mental filter every negative thing that happened. And then I brought it all back. You got the house, right?
Right.
Yeah, I had the house. Well, tell me about that house. I want to hear about the house. But she was so, and she even used the word traumatized, which is misfitting for this situation. And she used the word traumatized, and even those words, and we're going to get into labeling and how we use words, semantics, how to even challenge negative or cognitive distortions with semantics. So it goes right into discounting the positive. That's the next cognitive distortion. And here's an example. That's where you're insisting that your positive qualities don't count. So you have a great income, but you focus on what you don't have.
Right.
I have a great income, but I don't own a home yet. I have a great income, but I don't own that Lexus that I've always wanted.
Right.
I have a great income, but I don't have the vacations and passport filled with all the places I've wanted to go.
We're dealing with this one in my house right now.
Ooh, do tell.
My husband has always wanted to purchase a boat or a truck, and now he wants a truck to get a boat. And he's been very financially responsible. He was in the Army. He had a very reasonable Honda Elantra that he drove for probably 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Because he was being shipped all over the country and overseas, and it didn't make sense to spend $50,000, $60,000 on something he didn't really need. And then we got married, and now we're having kids, and it, again, still didn't make sense. And yet he has this sense of, well, if I just had a truck, then this would change or that would change. And so he struggles sometimes to remember that, I've got a great life and I have a wonderful family and I'm actually really happy. But if I had a truck,
it would make everything better. My food would taste better.
Absolutely.
The air would be cleaner, and I would hear more birds singing if I only had a truck.
And I would finally have accomplished all of my life goals and never need to worry about anything ever again.
Yeah, and that's good for examination, because in the financial world, I constantly tell people to reward themselves. He drove that Elantra for a long time.
Absolutely.
He's been a responsible husband. He's been a loving father.
Yes.
And a responsible father.
Yes.
He's actually, y'all, he's a father that spends time with his children. It's wonderful. So he's made a lot of sacrifices. So to have the want for the truck, nothing wrong with that. And I know that you're not challenging that. You're not challenging that. But it can be easy to fall into this distorted thinking where you discount everything else that you have.
Right.
Now, he's not there yet.
No.
And he's
and
mature
for
enough.
us, it comes around conversations on stress relief.
Yes.
And he talks about how, if he had this thing, in this case, this truck, then he could do this, and then he could do this, and he can do this. And then he starts to discount the fact that he could do a lot of those things.
Right.
A lot of the things that he's talking about are achievable and possible.
Right.
He doesn't need this one thing to make the rest of these things happen for himself.
I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I'm sure there's someone out there in the audience saying, wait, what? So don't get the truck? Wait, hold on a second. Okay. I was looking for an argument to present to my wife or to my husband. So it brings up a good point, because my husband, it wasn't the truck, it was a boat.
Yes.
So he has the truck, but he doesn't have the boat. But his loving wife developed skin cancer and had to have skin cancer removed.
Yes.
So his goal has now changed. It's shifted.
Yeah.
And I feel badly that and it's not that he'll never achieve that. At some point, hey, it may just be a bass boat, right? For going fishing, and maybe not the big one that he was hoping for.
Yeah.
But he had to grieve that loss. And it was a mental loss, not a reality. But knowing that he won't have it anytime soon, it is a loss. So I think a way to counter that is to practice radical acceptance. Okay, here's my situation. I'm not going to have that truck, or I'm not going to have that boat, but here's all the wonderful stuff that's going on. I have a healthy wife. I have healthy children, and they're boys, right? Isn't that fun?
Oh, yeah.
They're boys, so they're gonna have a truck. If he never gets a truck one day, they'll have a truck, right? Take them for a joyride,
right?
But that can go into grief. Here's the one that I was talking about that goes hand in hand with having a tween or a teen, but mostly teenagers. I call it the 7-year famine of reality. It starts when they're 13, doesn't really end till they hit their 20s, right? But that's when their prefrontal lobes start really solidifying and are growing further, right? And 25 is when not brain development, but when brain structure is complete. Not to say that our structure doesn't change, but brain development is complete. But every teenager falls into this fixed state of jumping to conclusions. Or I call them JTCs for short.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, there's a JTC right there in the room. So what happens is there are two forms of jumping to conclusions where there's fortune telling. This is one of my favorites. And because I've talked about this at length, we even talked about it in the happiness talk, where we are poor predictors of our emotional future.
Yes.
We believe that we can predict how things will turn out. And we especially want to predict that things will turn out poorly. And I just find that sad. But then the second form is mind reading. We're assuming that everyone is thinking negatively about us.
Right.
While we're thinking negatively about them.
Yes.
So maybe it is a true assumption. No, I'm just kidding. But we think that we can read the minds of others. You see this a lot with couples, I'm sure. Well, what he really meant to say was, no, I wasn't thinking that whatsoever. And we fail every time we try to read someone else's mind. And I call it the 7-year famine of reality for teenagers because they're in this ultra defensive, hypersensitive state. And a lot of that is due to hormones.
Yes.
They're taking another hormonal bath. It happened when they were 18 months old and into 2 years old. That was their first hormonal bath.
Right.
And they had tantrums.
I'm dealing with those right now.
Yes, because you just don't understand them. They're trying to communicate every which way. You don't understand them, they throw a tantrum. It's the same thing with teenagers. If you could only understand what I was experiencing, then you would know. So here's what this jumping to conclusion looks or sounds like in the financial world. This financial plan won't work out, so I might as well not work at it. That's the fortune telling, trying to predict that it's going to turn out poorly. Or the mind reading. My financial counselor thinks I'm an idiot.
Right.
I didn't come prepared. I didn't have a spend plan. Or if I did bring the spend plan, I have a deficit. So this financial counselor or this EAP provider thinks that I'm an idiot.
Right.
Which, are we usually thinking that about our clients?
No, and oftentimes what I remind people is think about how much you are thinking about yourself. Every person in the room is thinking that much about themselves.
Absolutely. So they don't have time to think about you.
No, they absolutely do not.
And a lot of times we are sensitive to body language, especially depending on your temperament. 2 out of the 4 are very sensitive to body language. And the way Carolyn is sitting right now is she's leaning into me and she's interested in the conversation. Her arms are crossed, but it is chilly in this room. So I know from many years of being on this planet that she's cold, she's not defensive. If someone had crossed their arms and they're leaning back and they're not into the conversation, I'm automatically assuming that they don't want to hear what I have to say. They were told they had to be here. They would just love to leave the room. When there could be several interpretations for that body language.
They could be thinking about the bills that they have to pay.
Exactly.
And they really want to be there, but they're so overwhelmed by their own experience that they're just having a hard time focusing.
That's right. Or it could be a comfort posture where I need something close to my heart. And so that's why I have my arms folded, whatever the case might be. So here's another cognitive distortion: magnification or minimization. We're either blowing things out of proportion or we're not giving it enough credence. So I might trivialize positive information, but exaggerate the negative information. So here's a financial example. Your financial counselor encourages you to increase your TSP. And you leave thinking, gosh, my financial counselor thinks I don't save enough. When in that entire session, your financial counselor gave you 10 gold stars for all the other things that you were doing well. I'm not saying doing right or saying doing wrong, because just because you haven't maximized your TSP doesn't mean, and for those in the audience, if you don't know what that is, that's the thrift savings plan or the 401k for the military. So we can magnify a negative more than a positive and therefore minimize something that is going on that is positive. We've already talked about our brains are like Velcro with negative thoughts and like Teflon with positive thoughts. It kind of goes back to that. But there's another thing too that we can tend to do with minimization in the financial world where, well, I looked at the statistics, and if 50% of the population doesn't have a spend plan or a budget, then what's the harm in me not having one?
Absolutely.
Everybody else is making it.
Right.
But are they? How much debt load do they have? You don't know. Do you want that debt load? And so people start going down this rabbit hole of everyone else is safe, so I'll be safe too. Right. But I'm going to stay in this rabbit hole and do nothing about it. So that's a piece of minimization that we can engage in. Emotional reasoning. Yeah, I see. Carolyn's really smiling on this one. We talked a lot about the brain so far and the fear center of our brain, the amygdala. And then we have this logical portion of our brain and the neocortex. And they're so close together. If you want to get out of the fear center of your brain or that emotional portion of your brain, you simply ask yourself a question to get back to the logical portion of your brain. So what we do in emotional reasoning is we attempt to reason with our emotions. I feel like a financial failure, so it's absolute truth.
And let me ask you there, where's the feeling? Because we often see with this emotional reasoning that we're not actually using real emotions. We're not actually identifying our emotions. Yeah. We're coming up with thoughts.
I feel embarrassed. I feel ashamed. And I feel disgusted. And so then that goes into the statement of I am a failure, right? So I feel like crap. I can't say the term that, what I normally hear. So it must be true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can't put a better emotional word picture than that word. But what I'll hear people say is paying down this debt feels hopeless. So I'm never going to be debt free. Or I feel ashamed that I've let it go this far. I get a lot of tears. And there's a lot of emoting that occurs in a financial counseling. And I would even say, Carolyn, more so in a financial counseling situation than when I was in clinical therapy.
Yeah. I mean, again, there is a reason we see such a high correlation between finances and mental health.
That's right.
Because there is so much stigma and shame around it.
Yes. And I think shame is the word of the day when it comes to the cognitive distortions, at least, which goes into the should statements that we belabored in our happiness talk. And so I'm not going to go into that too much, but there was something that Dr. Packett was talking about, and he brought up, and I never knew this before until he brought this up, that there's an old English word for where should originated. And it's from an old English term, skolde, and it means to scold. It almost sounds German to me.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, but I know a lot of those root words, right? And he made the statement that the should statements cause more suffering than any other cognitive distortion.
I absolutely believe that.
We're both nodding our heads to that one because we start to criticize ourselves and others. Now it's becoming interpersonal. It's no longer just personal. It's now interpersonal with shoulds, shouldn'ts, musts, have tos. And I know that there's got to be a listener like, oh, I can't wait to play this for my husband, or I can't wait to play this for my wife. So it's either self-directed or other-directed, but it many times is both. But here's an example. My boss should have given me that promotion.
Mm-hmm.
Had she given me the promotion, I would not be in this financial situation I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
Which, how do we know that for sure?
Absolutely.
And so now you have misplaced anger as
Mm-hmm.
well. And I should be able to follow a simple budget.
Yeah.
But so many people struggle with it.
Of course.
And
yeah.
until you come in and talk to a financial therapist, you're not going to know that.
Right.
You're going to beat yourself up with all these should statements. And as we lovingly said in that previous episode, you should all over yourselves.
Absolutely.
With these should statements.
Yeah.
All right. Here's the other cognitive distortion. This is when we were talking about the words and the labeling. Name calling, where you're hurling insults at yourself.
Absolutely.
And I know that you have to see so many clients that just could do that all session
Just
if
today,
you let them.
Just today, this was a topic of a conversation I had today, where we spent a significant amount of time just identifying the words that someone was using to describe themselves on a regular and consistent basis. And it goes right back to, the last episode with the automatic thoughts.
Right.
Those labels are often a big part of those automatic thoughts. You're bad.
Mm-hmm.
You're a failure.
Right. And if you look at financial assessments when they're assessing personality, they use words like spender and saver. Those have negative connotations.
Very much so.
They're labels, and couples hurl those at each other all the time.
And I'm even going to go to, it also plays into the other distorted thinking with some of that all or nothing. That either you are only a spender or you're only a saver. Right. When you've talked plenty about that, that's not, necessarily a reality.
Exactly. One is wanting to protect the finances, and one is simply wanting to show you how to celebrate life.
Yeah.
And they're both equally important. So we have to challenge those labeling distortions as well. Here's the last one, and we'll close with this one. And in the next part, we'll talk about how to effectively challenge these cognitive distortions. But as we stated in part one, it's great just to have this level of awareness of knowing which one do I engage in, so that you can be prepared next time to know how to attack it at the root, at its source, and move forward with some newfound thinking. So, last one, drum roll, personalization and blame.
Oh, yes.
Oh, this one is very hurtful. This is my top cognitive distortion. I tend to go into a party and I act like Olivia. I'm being myself. And you know what that entails.
Oh,
that includes talking, and, maybe a drink, some dancing, and just a good time.
Yeah.
On the drive home, I shouldn't have done that. Oh, he did not like that I did that. Oh, and now he's going to view me as unprofessional or something. I just take things so personally. And I know that that's not just me. I mean, these are the top 10 cognitive distortions. This is what we all have that we have to discover and then relabel and challenge. So this one is so sticky because you find fault and you focus on that fault rather than looking for a solution.
Yeah, and I'm the financial planner in our home. And so this is the one where I find myself getting caught up when something significant happens. We had a massive leak in our basement 3 days before I was giving birth.
Oh, goodness.
And when it happened, I got through it. We survived. Everything came out great. And then I got hit with all the bills. And it immediately became, wow, well, what were you thinking, Carolyn? Why did you choose that? Or why did you do that? Or why didn't you do this? And there was just so much blame on myself for a situation that I didn't have any control over. But that is how these distortions work.
That's right. And they take you from one extreme to another. Because if we really went back and examined every part of that, whether it was a party for me or the financial distress for you, You use the words, I did not have total control over that situation. That's a great way to challenge that belief right then and there. But had I done something differently, would I have wanted to do something differently?
Right.
Why would I not be Olivia?
Right.
Or why would I act like someone else? And then I would just have a whole new slew of distorted thinking on the drive home.
Oh, yeah.
Why didn't you act like yourself? What's wrong with you?
Well, and in my case, we made a big financial decision to go with flooring.
Okay.
And we had been planning on it, but we just weren't ready to do it at the time. And then we didn't have a choice because our entire basement flooded. And so I really beat myself up having a new baby and thinking, wow, we just shelled out thousands of dollars. We should have gone with something cheaper. But I'll tell you, now every time I go down there, I'm so happy.
Yeah.
But for quite a while, it was looking at bills and looking at expenses and looking at our budget and going, oh man, this isn't what we planned. And I made the mistake and I was the reason, that we're now having to move things around and figure things out.
And that's where that disappointment starts to form. It wasn't planned. And so you reacted the best way that you could in a situation that had never occurred for you before. So this was your first time dealing with this situation. And we also have to understand that even as we're challenging these cognitive distortions, it's not about striving for perfection either, because that's a cognitive distortion even in and of itself. We can strive for excellence because that is something that we can obtain. And we're measuring that for ourselves internally. But perfection is unobtainable.
Right.
But here's what something might look like in that personalization and blame in the financial world, just as you've already explained. But let's say your child can't pay their car note. And we see a lot of parents in these situations here at Redstone Arsenal. Your child fails to pay their car note. And you respond saying, this shows how bad of a parent I was. How poorly I modeled finances for my child. So therefore I should pay the car note. You're personalizing your adult child situation. Right. You're making it about you when this child is capable of adulting.
Right. And there's so many factors that have probably gone in to their situation.
Yes. Right. So personalization can be very luring to parents.
Oh, yeah.
Because it justifies them giving their children money. Money. Here's some money. Let me fix it. Here's some money.
Right.
Let me fix it. But it's not fixing it.
No.
And so you're not really solving the problem. You're band-aiding the problem.
You're prolonging the suffering for both your child as well as yourself.
It's a great way to put it. You have a financial relationship conflict. And you say to the spouse, it's all your fault. Had you not been the spender.
Right.
Or all those labels, right? So we're adding another cognitive distortion in with that one. Had you not done this, then we wouldn't be in this situation. And that's unfair to both people. And like you said, it just prolongs the suffering. So next part, we will inform you on how to challenge these cognitive distortions so that you can free yourself financially and move towards that financial success that you were seeking when you started listening to this podcast. I'm sure there was something that you had in mind where you thought, if only I could get out of that thinking trap and move in this direction and consistently either pay my bills on time or get out from living from paycheck to paycheck, or finally start a savings account and not touch it. There could be several goals out there that folks are striving for. But let us help you continue to challenge these distortions, and we hope to see you, or would love for you to listen next time.